Apple, this is a very interesting name, one that you almost can't go a full, trading day without talking about a little bit, given its, impact it has on the market, on the Nasdaq, and and consumers across the world. But interesting headlines coming out last week about Apple reshuttering some of its stores. They say it's due to being cautionary and an abundance of caution, but I'm interested, your take on that, and also what data you're showing as consumers have navigated this and been able to still get iPhones through e-commerce. Is there just less incentive to have these stores open?
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely less incentive. You're right there. People are ordering online, and we'll get into some of the data, but they're not shy about ordering online. There's a lot of purchase intent around Apple and all of its products right now. They're doing very well, and you talk about how they're doing in the market. This stock is at 356. It was at 324 before all the COVID stuff, and so it's actually up 10%. It sold off quite a bit, but it's bounced back, and now it's basically at all-time highs. Absolutely crushing it right now, leading the markets higher. So yes, Apple is a name that investors are loving right now. And I think it comes down to consumer reaction. When we look at purchase intent on a overall company basis, that's what this chart is showing. The green line is the 90-day moving average of purchase intent. That's essentially when people are saying, I'm getting a new iPhone, I'm getting a new watch, iPad, Mac, whatever it may be, indicating that they're buying something. And you can see that it's doing very well. It has these spikes in September every year. So don't read this as a down move. It's actually just a spike every year in September around the keynote address. But right now that purchase intent is up about 30% year over year. So doing very strong, again, as the stock makes all-time highs. So what's interesting is when you actually look at this on a brand by brand basis, the iPhone's doing well. It's about 37% up. Mac is doing well, 58% up. But the one that is really kind of jumping out is the iPad. And that had a huge bump right when the quarantine started. And you can imagine why. I mean, as a parent of 3 little kids, we got some more electronic devices in the house because we needed them. I mean, they were doing remote schooling, and they just were home way more, and they just had to have something to soak up their attention and entertain them. And so I don't think we were alone in that. iPads are up 81% year over year right now. And it's actually you can see that huge spike, and it was temporary for just as far as the first week or two, but it actually sustained an increased level after that. So the iPad kind of got a resurgence from the quarantine, and overall Apple's doing extremely well.
Landon, you're exactly right. I have an 8th grader about to start high school in the fall, and the one thing that the school said she needed the first day of school was an iPad. That's the number one thing that they said she needed to have day one. So but when I'm looking at your brand, your consumer purchase on the iPad, it looks like a story that we've told several times during this coronavirus, and that is that you see the spike, right? But then that it's coming back down, but resting at significantly higher levels. Is that what I'm seeing? Am I reading that correctly? Because it looks like it's significantly higher. I'm sure you could put a percentage on it, but it seems to be resting at a higher level than it was pre-coronavirus, Landon.
Yeah, it's 40 to 50% higher than it was. And this is months later, right? So this is the middle of March is when that big spike took place, and now we're in the middle of June, and it's 40 to 50% higher than it was in, say, February. And so it changed a little bit of the behaviors out there. And even though this isn't a subscription product, it's just a lot more people started buying it. And I don't know if it's word of mouth or you just see more people with it and everyone's got to have one. I'm not really sure, but the spike is holding. I mean, not the spike, obviously, but still the levels are holding much higher than they were before, 40 for 50% increase. And that's nice because the iPad was, it had been going down. We saw a little bit of a resurgence with smaller companies using Square and things like that as their e-commerce solution or as their checkout solution. That you get the Square, you plug it into your iPad. We saw a little bit of resurgence with that, but then this quarantine was just a massive bump for that product.
Yeah, Landon, a lot to unpack here. Starting off, though, here, what a difference 18 months can make for Apple shareholders. Stock trades down to 142 at the end of 2018. and is now at 355. So this is definitely one that even when it seems down and out, it is tough to write off. Incredible here. But then also, you mentioned the idea of kind of the iPad just being such a versatile product there. Kevin's talking about applications for it to be used in an education and school environment. You're talking about the small business component. Obviously, an entertainment component. It's another way of reading books, and and there's so many uses for this product. It doesn't surprise me that if people have more time, they're finding that this is a product they could find value in, and to see that. But it's important to note here, Landon, we don't often talk about this with the scaling on your charts, but this isn't a matter of 10 mentions going to 14, and that's a 40% year over year growth. We're talking about thousands of mentions for this company. This is one of the world's largest companies, one of the most powerful brands. To see the kind of growth that you're showing, given how large this company is absolutely incredible.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about Twitter. And that has millions, hundreds and millions of users. And we're taking in not only just when are people talking about Apple or when are they talking about iPad, but when are they talking about buying an iPad? That's what we call purchase intent. And that's still just so many mentions on a daily basis. And that 90-day moving average is a huge, huge number. So you're right. This is not some anomaly that's just sort of bleeping off the charts here, and it's just we'll call it a 40%. This is a 40% increase, and it's holding, and so we'll see if it continues to hold. But across the board, most of their brands are doing really well. I think the watch and the AirPods are just sort of about where they were, not really impressive, but the iPad is leading the way. The phone's doing really well with the SE release and also the pent-up demand for 5G. And also Apple TV is doing really well. They got a nice bump from HBO Max, basically singling them out as the place to get it. So all in all, Apple's doing really well. I know today they've got that developers conference that there's a lot of focus on looking at whether or not they're going to move away from Intel processors and do their own. So that's another thing investors need to consider. If they did that, that could represent about a 2 to 4% revenue decline for Intel if Apple moves all over to internal processing for their iPhones. So definitely one to watch in the news today.
Absolutely. And Kevin, when I look at this here and I see the incredible run that Apple's been on, we hear so much about its incredible cash position and its balance sheet strength. And that's obviously given it an advantage over so many other companies trying to weather a storm here. But I can't help but scratch my head and think, we read these headlines about the store closures and how so many of their stores still remain closed. But if they're performing this strong throughout this period of time with their stores closed, what's holding them back from just working towards almost a full e-commerce channel? And I'm sure they could do so at a much better margin.
Well, I think they closed. I've got the stats here. They closed 11 stores, 6 in Arizona, 2 in Florida, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in South Carolina, Alex. But remember, that's a small fraction. And if I'm not making news here when I tell people that Apple stores are a mob scene in the Chicago area every time they're open. It's an amazing event to go by an Apple store and see how many people go in there on a daily basis. So I think the Apple stores are still important. I think they were quick to close 11 stores total in some of these areas that are showing some spikes. And they said out of abundance of caution, and this is just temporary. So they downplayed it as much as they could. But listen, this stock is just, I can only imagine. One last thing I'd like to ask Landon is, Landon, in terms of your sample size for measuring Apple readings on LikeFolio in the data, is their sample size just massive? Is it bigger than other sample sizes that you guys measure? And how do they compare? Because I can't imagine. It's got to be an enormous sample size that you guys get to deal with.
Oh, yeah. Apple's fantastic. It's one of the largest by far. I think we're getting around 80 to 100,000 mentions per day, and so it's really easy to call that a large enough sample size and to deduce what kind of shifts in consumer behavior we're seeing. Alex hinted at some of our other companies get 10 to 15 purchase intent mentions a day, much smaller companies, and we have to take that into consideration. But with Apple, we're very confident behind the numbers. They're huge, and it's
Right.
people just declaring, I am buying this or I am going to the store, that kind of thing. And you're right, the stores are key. I think they've got like 250 or 300 stores in the U.S. and only 11 are closed, so it's not a big deal, but it's something to watch if that number does start to go up. But people love to go into the stores and get their hands on products, and I think that really makes you more likely to buy. Either if you're getting your hands on a friend's product or in the store with one of the employees showing you around it. So it is important that they stay open for the company, but right now they're firing on all cylinders, doing really well at all-time highs. Love this company.
Yeah, Landon, we got to wrap this up. And I didn't even mean it that way. I meant it more of just it's incredible to see that much growth on a company that gets this many mentions. But
Right.
all to wrap this all up here, we've seen an incredible run in Apple stock, 18 months worth of basically an incredible performance going from 142 to 356. And this is through all the volatility of the sell-off regarding the pandemic. But Landon, is the data strong enough just to validate this move, or is it strong enough to be looking for a continued push higher here?
I think it is. I think the data does support all-time highs right now. Purchase intent is extremely strong. As I talked about earlier, though, that September keynote is really, really important. It allows us at LikeFolio to predict how well Apple products, especially the iPhone, which is the big one, how well those products are going to sell over the coming months. And so, yes, I do like investing in Apple here, but we're only about 3 months away from that keynote, and I think that's extremely important. We put out a big report every year on the reception of that, and so we're going to be watching. Do they come out with 5G? Are people jumping on these iPhones as much as investors may expect? And so, I think that's going to tell the tale. But right now, to answer your question, I do think the data supports all-time highs for Apple.